Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking about my experience rereading some of my favorite childhood books. I have loved these books for a really long time, and I have consistently said that, these are some of my favorites, that this is one of my favorite series, and recently I went back and reread them, and I just wanted to talk about that. And you probably know from the title and or thumbnail that I'm talking about A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snicket. I read the first 4 books for this video. I had originally intended to read the whole series again, but I ended up not doing that for reasons that I will get into. But yeah, here we go. I've tried to make this video a couple of times, but I didn't really like how it was coming out any of those times, so here we are again. I did mention this briefly in a wrap-up a couple of months ago. I had intended to put this video out sooner, but like I said, I was kind of having trouble with it. But basically, I just didn't enjoy them as much as I expected that I would. I got into them and I started reading them, and I was expecting all this nostalgia and joy and like a sense of homecoming to kind of wash over me. The sense that I get when I read some of my favorite books. I was expecting all that wonder and delight that I had had when I read it in previous times. And I just did not get that this time, which is basically the main reason why I stopped with the series reread, because I just wasn't getting the enjoyment out of it that I wanted. And I have some ideas about why this might be, but first I want to talk about the books themselves, and then at the end of the video I'm just going to talk about my feelings a little bit more. So the first 4 books of A Series of Unfortunate Events. I will be going over spoilers for each of these books, and I'm going to try and keep it brief on all of them, but we will see how that goes. So, A Series of Unfortunate Events, if you are not familiar with the series, it is basically about these 3 children, the Baudelaires, who lose their family. And this happens in the first chapter of the first book. The children are playing at the beach when a banker, Mr. Poe, walks up to them and says, unfortunately, your house and parents have been lost in a terrible fire. The 3 children have to deal with their lives following this terrible event. The 3 children are Violet, who is the oldest at 14, Klaus, who is the middle child, I believe he's 12, and Sunny, who is a baby. And each of them has kind of their own thing that they're particularly good at. Violet is an inventor, so she likes to build things and make things. Klaus is a reader and researcher. He's really good at getting information out of books and doing a lot of reading. And Sunny, as a baby, doesn't have that many skills, but she does have 4 extremely sharp teeth that she uses to bite things. So the first book is called The Bad Beginning. And like I said, it starts off with getting this terrible news that their parents have died and their house has been destroyed in a terrible fire. Importantly, the Baudelaire family is extremely rich. And the Baudelaires, the children, will inherit their parents' fortune when Violet is an adult, when Violet comes of age. But until then, they can't use it. So they have to be put in the charge of some other adult. And a lot of this series is whimsical and follows different set of rules than real life. Like, it will set up the rules of the world for you. So it's not a fantasy exactly, because there aren't any magical elements, but it very much takes place in a world that is like our own, but also not the same. It'll make more sense as I get more into it. But basically, they are set up with this banker, Mr. Poe, who is in charge of their affairs because they have this huge fortune. So for whatever reason, Mr. Poe is the one in charge. And so he is set to the task of finding them a new guardian. According to him, the parents' will says that the children will be raised in the most convenient way possible. And for Poe, that means the nearest relative. And the nearest relative is a man named Count Olaf. So they get put into Count Olaf's care. Count Olaf is a vile human being. He's abusive, disgusting, neglectful, overall very terrible. And on top of all of that, he also is set on getting access to their fortune, which is probably why he accepted the idea of caring for them in the first place. because the first thing he says when they show up is that now that they have money, they can use it to fix up the smelly, dirty home that he lives in. And he is told right then that he will not have any access to it. Nobody will have access to it until Violet is an adult. So he is displeased with this, and he has this large home, even though it's hideously dirty. It's very spacious. But he has the three children live all in one room. There's only one bed, so Violet and Klaus take turns with the bed, and whoever doesn't have the bed sleeps on the floor in like a pile of blankets. They make a little makeshift bed for Sunny out of curtains and a shoebox. So living with Count Olaf is terrible, but it becomes even more terrible when Count Olaf starts scheming about how to get their fortune. He also has them cook a complicated dinner for him and his entire acting troupe, and he ends up hitting Klaus in the face at one point. The kids try to go to Mr. Poe to get a new guardian or to do something about Count Olaf, but he dismisses and disregards them. He basically doesn't listen, doesn't hear them. And this is going to be a theme throughout the books. So Mr. Poe does not help them, and they have to go back home to, they have to go back to Count Olaf's house. Then Count Olaf reveals that he is going to have them be a part of this play that he's putting on. Count Olaf is an actor. He has an acting troupe. And after doing a lot of research and digging, they figure out that Count Olaf is up to something really despicable with this play. So the play is called The Marvelous Marriage, and the idea is that he will be playing the lead actor and Violet will be playing the lead actress, and so they will be getting married in the play. However, he has it set up so that there is a justice who will be present at the play, his neighbor, who will be present, and in this community, this fictional community, all you need is a justice to be present as they say their vows, and then the bride has to sign something, and then they are legally married. So basically, he is going to actually marry Violet, and in doing so, he will get access to her fortune, which is obviously disgusting and horrible for a lot of reasons. What ends up happening is that Violet gets out of it by signing with her left hand, because the rule stipulates that she must sign something in her own hand. And since she is right-handed, as we've had pointed out to us a couple of times throughout the book, when Violet signs something with her left hand, she is able to trick Count Olaf into thinking that she's done it, which allows them to save Sunny, who is being held captive in a bird cage with the threat of her being dropped from the bird cage and down a giant tower. But Violet is able to convince him that she's gone along with his plan long enough for Sunny to be released safely. They get Sunny back, and it seems like things are going to wrap up, but then Count Olaf gets away with his terrible troupe. So the rest of the books follow the adventures of the Baudelaires trying to outmaneuver the schemes of Count Olaf. So there is a lot to love about this book. Obviously, it is dark, but it kind of warns you that it's going to be dark in this kind of whimsical way. The narrator, Lemony Snicket, will frequently say, hey, this is going to be a bad time. So the reader knows what they're getting set up for. To me, this is one of the saddest books because they are actually directly under Count Olaf's power for a huge chunk of it, for the majority of it, which I think makes it a little bit harder to read. And Count Olaf's scheme in this particular book is especially horrendous to me. Really viscerally disgusting. I like the main characters. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny are clever, and they use their wits and their skills to get out of these situations, which I enjoy. Count Olaf is a really hateable villain, really just awful. But also, it just wasn't sparking that magic that I was expecting it to spark for me. Like I said, I have loved and read these books, but it didn't feel like I was really enjoying a lot of it, despite the enjoyable aspects. So I don't know if it was just me. There were some things that I wasn't super fond of. One thing was the depictions of his acting troupe. His acting troupe they're cast as very unusual, a lot of times in physicality, and this unusualness is supposed to be really terrifying, which I didn't really enjoy the depictions of them that way. For example, there is one androgynous, non binary person. They're described as looking like neither a man nor a woman, but these days I think we would agree that this character is supposed to be non binary. And this character will come up again when I talk about The Wide Window, but essentially, the fact that this person is androgynous, that they don't have a specific manly or womanly appearance, is sort of cast as being upsetting. And that's the case with a lot of his troupe, not specifically in terms of being androgynous, but in terms of being different in some way. One man has hooks instead of hands, one person is bald and has a very long pointy nose, things like that. You're supposed to be terrified because of their appearance, and their appearances are things that could actually occur with a lot of people, which I just it didn't sit well with me, because being terrified of them because of their villainous behavior, to me, makes perfect sense. They're awful people, but the ways in which they were given this shorthand kind of treatment of they're terrifying because of appearance, I just didn't really like it. I know that was kind of long-winded and a little bit complicated, but hopefully that made sense. It didn't sit right with me. And some of the depictions of his cohorts are going to continue to not sit right with me throughout the other books. Speaking of the other books, the next up was The Reptile Room. This one I was pretty excited for because we have in this the guardian that takes care of the Baudelaires is Uncle Monty, who is really fun and nice and cool. And it was nice to get the Baudelaires having a little bit of joy in their lives. Uncle Monty is a reptile expert, and he has this giant room full of exotic reptile types. So we got a lot of fun, different types of snakes and lizards and amphibians. And I thought that was really cool. It made the world seem really fun. And Uncle Monty is just a fun guardian. His real name is Montgomery, and people tease him for it, which he doesn't appreciate. But the Baudelaires don't tease him for it. They think he's great. They're having a great time until Uncle Monty gets a new assistant. And the new assistant is actually Count Olaf in disguise, which the Baudelaires figure out right away. But when they try to tell Uncle Monty, he thinks Count Olaf is a spy from the Herpetological Society coming to steal information about the new snake that he's discovered, the incredibly deadly viper, which is its actual name that he has given it. So they're all supposed to go on a trip to Peru. So when they try to tell him that he's actually Count Olaf, he doesn't believe them. However, he's still suspicious of Count Olaf. Count Olaf is pretending to be a man named Stefano at this point. He has disguised himself. He covered his tattoo with makeup. He has a tattoo of an eye on his ankle. This is important because a lot of times it's how they discover that he is Count Olaf. And by discover, I mean reveal to the adults who don't believe them that he is Count Olaf. So Stefano is still considered untrustworthy by Uncle Monty, who is going to leave him behind on this trip to Peru that they're all supposed to go on. Count Olaf's scheme in this book is basically to get them to Peru where he can do crimes more easily. That's his plan. So Uncle Monty, fearing that Stefano is going to steal his work, he rips up his ticket to Peru. So the Baudelaires, in a heated conversation with Count Olaf, reveal this information, and Stefano then secretly murders Uncle Monty so that the remaining tickets will be used for himself and the Baudelaire children. The next day, Mr. Poe happens to show up when Stefano is going to drive away with the children, and they get in a car crash, which buys them some time so that they can try and figure out a way to prove that Stefano is Count Olaf and that he has murdered Uncle Monty. And they are, in fact, able to do so eventually. It takes some trickery, but basically they trick Count Olaf into revealing that he does, in fact, know a lot about reptiles, and that he could have used the venom to poison Uncle Monty, which is how Uncle Monty died. It has previously been framed as one of the snakes killed him. One thing that I liked in this book and the previous book that really goes along with the theme of adults not listening to children is that they only believe that Count Olaf is up to something evil when Count Olaf, in his pride, admits it. And that happens again in this book, where he starts rambling on about all the things that he knows about reptiles, revealing himself to be a liar. And that is what allows them to sort of reveal that he is Count Olaf, in fact. He has an assistant who's pretending to be a doctor, but that's pretty much everything that happens in the second book. And then Count Olaf gets away with his not a doctor assistant. They drive away, and once again, they are free. This one was probably the one that I enjoyed the most out of the four, just because, like I said, Uncle Monty is fun. The reptiles are fun. It was whimsical, and it sucks that Uncle Monty was murdered, but it was nice to see a little bit of joy in the Baudelaire's lives. Next up is The Wide Window. This one held a special place in my heart because when I was a kid, they didn't have the first two books at the library. So the first book that I was able to get was this one, The Wide Window, book number 3 in the series. So this was the first book of the series of unfortunate events that I read the first time that I read them. I was excited to go back to this. After not having that wave of nostalgia in the first two books, I was really expecting it to hit with this one. And once again, it did not. There's also a plot point in this one that I managed to gloss over in my memories of the book, which is interesting because it is a huge plot point in the book. And just to give you a heads up, this book does deal with, and this is the plot point that I had forgotten about, this book deals with a fake suicide. In this book, they get a new guardian after the loss of Uncle Monty. They get the new guardian, Aunt Josephine. And Aunt Josephine has just lost her husband recently. She's been very lonely, so she's excited to take on these kids. The problem with Aunt Josephine is that she is terrified of everything. She basically has an extreme case of anxiety about everything in her life, and it basically prevents her from living a normal life. For example, she's afraid of the stove, not because she thinks it's going to burn anything down, but for some other arbitrary reason. I don't remember what it is. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Okay, I was wrong. She's afraid that the oven will burst into flames, and she's afraid that if you touch a doorknob, it could shatter into millions of pieces and one might hit you in the eye. That is the degree of fear that she has. And she's also terrified of the lake over which her house overlooks. And this is Lake Lachrymose, which is full of the lachrymose leeches. And these leeches are special carnivorous leeches that will eat you entirely rather than just sucking your blood. They will devour you if you have eaten any food recently. That's going to be important. So the kids go to live with Aunt Josephine. Things are kind of miserable because all of their food is ice cold. They're kind of prevented from doing a lot of things because of Aunt Josephine's fear. And then who shows up but Count Olaf once again in the disguise of Captain Sham, who is pretending to pursue Aunt Josephine just long enough to get her on the phone, where he convinces her to fake her own death and leave the Baudelaires in the care of Captain Sham. And so she does do that. She fakes her own death. Allegedly, she has thrown herself out the window. She has a library, and in that library, she has a huge window, and the window overlooks the lake. And when they go into the library to try and find her, the window has been shattered, and there is a note left behind by Aunt Josephine explaining all of this. This note is very important because Aunt Josephine had very strict grammar. She had zero patience for anybody using grammar incorrectly, but her note is full of grammar mistakes. Through all the grammar mistakes, they're able to determine that she's actually in a cave near the lake called Curdled Cave. They're able to find it hidden within the note's grammar mistakes. Because they don't want to be left in the care of Captain Sham, who is actually Count Olaf, they're like, all right, we're going to go find her in Curdled Cave. So they basically steal a boat and use that boat to cross the lake. But This is all happening during a hurricane, so it's very dramatic and there's a lot of storminess happening, but they're able to cross the lake and get to Curdled Cave. While they're stealing the boat, Count Olaf's associate, the androgynous non-binary associate, is there, and that's important because there is a extremely long passage during which Sunny is stealing the keys from the associate, and they are described very unpleasantly, by which I mean it was extremely uncomfortable for me to read this passage because they are described as it the entire time. There's a lot of really gratuitous focus on how fat the character is, which I also did not particularly enjoy, and it makes them seem really just monstrous for these features, which I did not like. I realize that these books are on the older side now, but that didn't change the fact that I was uncomfortable during that passage. It just, once again, did not sit well with me. But they're able to steal the boat, steal the keys, steal the boat. They get to Curdled Cave. Aunt Josephine is there. Aunt Josephine is planning to hide out in a cave for the rest of her life with the Baudelaires because she doesn't want to face Count Olaf. The only reason that she leaves the cave is because Klaus points out that the cave is for sale, which means that there are going to be realtors. And Aunt Josephine is terrified of realtors, so she agrees to leave. On their way back, however, it is revealed that Aunt Josephine recently ate a banana, and because of that, the lachrymose leeches are attacking them. They're attacking their little boat, and the leeches are succeeding in breaking holes in the boat with the force of their attacks. They send up a distress signal, and the distress signal is spotted by none other than Captain Sham, who arrives and takes them onto his boat, which is much larger and safer, and agrees to save them, but only if Aunt Josephine agrees to pretend to be dead still, so that he can have the kids. And she agrees to this because she is afraid that she will be murdered by Count Olaf, which is obviously really sad. It sucks that the Guardian prioritized her own life over that of the children that she was supposed to be protecting, which is the whole point, that she is so afraid that she will choose herself, essentially. But she also corrects Count Olaf's grammar, and because of that, he decides to murder her anyway. So he throws her into the lake where the leeches are. And we don't see it, but it is heavily implied and then confirmed that she was killed by the leeches. They get back to shore. Sunny reveals that Captain Sham is Count Olaf by biting his peg leg in half, which cracks, and then reveals his actual leg, which reveals the tattoo, which convinces Mr. Poe. And the end of the book is, once again, Count Olaf getting away. I pretty much explained my feelings on this one already. I did not have the sense of homecoming that I wanted to have with it. I don't know how I forgot about this, but I was kind of shocked by the suicide portion of it. This book series is for kids, and that was a little bit intense to read about, even though it wasn't true, and the narrator makes sure to know that we know that it's not true. It was still a lot to take, especially them poring over her suicide note. That was a little bit intense. Finally, we have The Miserable Mill, book 4, and this one follows them as they are adopted by a man who owns a mill, and he is going to have them work at the mill. This mill has extremely dubious labor guidelines, and he pays them in coupons, which they can never spend because they need to have money for the other half that the coupon wouldn't pay for, right? But they never get paid in money, so they can't ever use them. And they get gum for lunch. It is truly a terrible thing. And this one tends to be a little bit more ridiculous, a little bit more satirical, because it's really pointing out how atrocious these labor conditions are. But also in this one, we have hypnotism. So they're at a lumber mill, which is full of dangerous things. And Klaus ends up getting tripped by the foreman, who is secretly Count Olaf's associate, but he's in disguise. So the foreman trips Klaus. Klaus has to go get his glasses repaired. And he goes to the optometrist, but the optometrist is secretly a hypnotist working for Count Olaf. and she hypnotizes Klaus so that when he hears the code word, he will use the machinery to brutalize somebody, which is what happens. Fortunately, nobody is killed, but one character gets his leg like absolutely mangled by some machinery. In this one, the usual Violet invents something and Klaus does a bunch of research thing is switched around a little bit, which I thought was fun. Violet ends up doing a bunch of research and discovers information about hypnotism, and she is able to figure out what she needs to do, which is say the unhypnotizing word in order to snap Klaus out of it. In this one, we also have Count Olaf dressed up as Shirley, who is pretending to be the assistant of the optometrist slash hypnotist slash sword fighter, as we discover at the end of the book. She has a cane that she reveals is actually a sword. She has a sword cane. She and Sunny get into a sword fight in which she is wielding her sword and Sunny is wielding her teeth. So that was fun. This book concludes basically with the optometrist stepping back into an active buzzsaw. So she's not a problem anymore after that, and Count Olaf gets away, as usual. His scheme in this book is to get Klaus to cause a bunch of accidents, which will cause him to be disowned by the mill owner, who then says that he will give over the children to a young lady in the village who wants kids terribly badly, and that would be Shirley, the assistant, Count Olaf. And this gets into one of the things that was not working for me with the series overall is Count Olaf's plans to get the fortune in the first book made a lot of sense. He's gonna become Violet's husband and get the fortune that way. But in later books, it seems like what his plan is just to get them under his control again, which obviously is a state that the Baudelaires want to avoid for a lot of obvious reasons, because Count Olaf is incredibly terrible. But it doesn't explain exactly how he's going to get their fortune once that happens. Like in the case of the Wide Window and the Miserable Mill, in both cases, he just becomes their guardian again, which puts him right back at the beginning, like how he was in the bad beginning, where he's their guardian, but he still can't get access to their fortune. So that really seems like the first step. And he doesn't have a scheme beyond that yet, which was just something that I thought about, and it didn't really fit as nicely in my brain as I wanted it to. So he acts like he's one step away from success, and then everything doesn't work out for him because the children reveal his plans, but he's not actually one step away from success. He's not almost there. He's only one step away from the end of step 1, which is getting the children under his power again. And then he would need to do something else in order to get the fortune, because obviously the children being in his guardianship is not enough for him to get the fortune. So to me, that was a little bit of a hole, something that bothered me. I started reading book 5 after this, and after I finished book 4, and I just wasn't really having fun with it anymore. So I think that, at least for now, the magic of it just wasn't getting to me. And I don't know if it's just, I read these books a bunch of times as a kid, and they had their moment for me. And now that I'm an adult, it doesn't ring true the same way, which is possible. Or maybe I read it enough times and it gave me that magic enough times and it just doesn't anymore. That might be another reason. But I was pretty disappointed by this. For one thing, I don't like talking negatively about books, and I really don't want to talk negatively about this book series that I have loved for so long. There are so many things that I still like about this book series, and that I still think are fun and compelling, and the humor is still there a lot of times, the dark humor. And I think the series probably gets better as you continue. I just wasn't feeling it at this time. And maybe it was just me at the moment. I am not going to unhaul these books or anything like that because I still look on them really fondly. I have them down here. I meant to hold them up as I talked about each one. But I forgot to do that. So here they are now, if you would like to see them. Probably you saw them, due to the power of editing. I still think these hold a lot of magic for me, and they were really helpful throughout my childhood. But it was an interesting experience to go back. I was in the mood to reread my favorites. That was the whole reason that I started doing this, is because I haven't read these in a long time. I was in the mood to reread some favorites, talk about how much I love them, talk about all the tiny little details that he plants in there that are so great. And I still believe all those things. It's just there were some elements that I didn't like, and it wasn't having the spark for me that I was expecting. It's also been a really long time since I read these books. I've evolved as a reader, and probably a lot of my tastes have changed. I do tend to like fantasy better, but that's always been the case, and I still really enjoyed these books when I was younger, and I loved fantasy then too. So that's basically how I'm feeling about it. I might pick up the rest of the series again in the future just to see if the rest of the series kind of sparkles for me the way that I was expecting. But yeah, it was nice to go back and reread them, even though my experience was not what I expected. Let me know if you have a similar experience of going back and rereading a childhood favorite and having it not be what you expected, not give you the enjoyment and the nostalgia that you were expecting. Or if you're a fan of a series of unfortunate events, let me know. I know a lot of people get angry about the ending. That is actually something that I liked about the books. And like I said, I still might go back and finish rereading them. Let me know if you would be interested in seeing that. And that's all for today. So thank you very much for hanging out with me. I know this was a long one, so if you stuck around to the end, I really appreciate it. And have a great night, universe.